Ladies and gentlemen, a very hearty good afternoon to one and all. I, Abhishek, on behalf of Vivekananda Samiti, IITK Kanpur, welcome you all to the Vivekananda Youth Leadership Convention 2013. This evening, as we have come to end of this great journey, we are honored to have in our presence Dr. Chandan Mitra, Editor and Managing Director of The Pioneer. Dr. Mitra has had an exemplary career spanning many national dailies like The Statesman, The Times of India and The Sunday Observer. He is also currently a member of Rajya Sabha as a BJP MP. Today evening, he will be discoursing on relevance of Swami Vivekananda's teaching for the 21st century youth. This talk will undoubtedly be a novel experience for each one of us. May I request Dr. Chandan Mitra to please come on the stage.
The Dean, Dr. Ghosh, other members of the IIT Kanpur faculty, and students of one of India's most prestigious institutions. I must tell you that I'm very happy and delighted, in fact, to be here. And as soon as the invitation came, I actually accepted it immediately. It's just that the date had to change because I was planning to come here on the 12th of January, which would have coincided with Swamiji's birth anniversary. Unfortunately, other preoccupations caused me to push that back, and I thank you for nevertheless agreeing to postpone my visit. I understand it's exam time, and you all have your heads down in your books and practicals, and studying very hard, which you must do. This is obviously the most crucial time for students. We've all been students, and we know how we dreaded exam time. So I don't blame you, and I hope that you will go back from here not thinking of this as a wasted opportunity or wasted time. I would like to speak for 30 to 40 minutes, and then be open to some questions, roughly on the subject, but you are welcome to question me on other issues as well. The first point I would like to make, see, and although I have described my lecture as the relevance of Swami Vivekananda for 21st century youth in India, I want to try and make this lecture a little relevant for you and today's youth. Because it should not be, because one thing that worries me a great deal is that all these birth anniversaries, centenaries, sesquicentennials that we celebrate end up being largely ritualistic. We pay ritualistic tribute, lip service. People recall the teachings and words of our sages and other great leaders, starting from Mahatma Gandhi downwards. And that's just for a day that it happens, and we promptly forget about those teachings next day. Because somehow these are not made relevant to today's generation. I'm glad, at least from your Vivekananda Samiti, which is holding a series of such talks, has not confined itself to just one day of one big event, but as an ongoing message to commemorate 150 years of the birth of one of India's greatest sages and philosophers. And he was not a philosopher in the traditional sense of being a bookish man or a theoretical person only. He combined philosophy with action and provided concrete avenues for how you could carry thoughts and philosophies into action, and right down to common people. Now take, for instance, the idea of the Ramakrishna Mission. Now, the Ramakrishna Mission, which Swamiji helped found, had that not happened, the ideas of the great Sant at whose feet Swamiji received his Diksha and practiced, that is Swami Ramakrishna Paramhans, would have all remained on paper. he may have would have developed a cult following, and only his cult followers would have followed his ideas, or everybody would have donned saffron robes, and there would have been a monastic order, one more monastic order. We have so many of them in this country now. But matters would have ended there. And what Swamiji did, however, was that in order to take those aspects of Ramakrishna Paramhansa's teachings and add some of his own, and then develop a great institution called the Ramakrishna Mission with very clearly defined goals and ideas and objectives, set up a whole chain of schools across the country. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Ramakrishna Mission schools in various parts of India. In Bengal, from where I also come, the school at Narendrapur in South 24 Pargana is regarded as one of the finest schools in not only in Bengal but in the rest of India. Its students have excelled wherever they have gone. Similar schools exist in many other parts of India. They have research institutes, teaching institutes, do various acts of philanthropy, particularly for the upliftment of the rural poor. Because the concept of Daridra Narayan, that God resides in the poorest of the poor, in the poor man, that God has not neglected, the notion that God has neglected somebody and that's why he or she is poor, that idea is something which Swamiji combated and evolved the concept of the Daridra Narayan, that if you want to worship God, do something for the poor. Today, these ideas and thoughts seem very commonplace. Everybody keeps saying all this. But you must remember the context in which he said it. Born in 1863, in the middle of the 19th century, within a few years of the 1857 War of Independence, which many of you, particularly those who are from Kanpur, know. Bittur is right here, next door, and you know what 1857 meant to the people of India, particularly the entire Gangetic belt. So in that context, when medieval ideas and modern ideas, Western ideas, were clashing at every level, Swamiji came up with certain radical thoughts, where the idea was to, I would say, rescue India's spirituality and largely the Hindu society from the moribund way it had become. Let's go back to the time and see the kind of moribund nature of society at that point of time. You may have heard of the concept of Kala Pani. Kala Pani, have you heard? Kala Pani, how many have? Well, now, Kala Pani, in today's common parlance, you would be thinking of Andaman and the cellular jail, because when the British sentenced somebody to externment and a life outside the country, terrorists in particular, so-called terrorists, they were all sent to the Andamans. That's why that sentence itself came to be known as Kala Pani, kind of deportation. You had to cross the black water to get to Andaman. But Kala Pani was not only that. There were kind of fatwas which debarred Hindus from crossing the seas on pain of losing their caste. Anybody who crossed the seas was said to have lost his caste and therefore would not be accepted back in society. And given the stranglehold of caste in our social life, continues even today, but far less than it used to be, this was considered the most severe punishment, losing the caste and thereby facing social ostracism was something that people dreaded. The idea behind this Kala Pani was to retain the purity of Indians, particularly Hindus. Now, Swamiji revolted against the idea. He said, we cannot become so insular. India is a great civilization. It has a message to give, not only to the rest, to our own country, but also to the rest of the world. So all these taboos have been invented by people who are insecure. And you have to break them. You have to break these taboos, and crossing the Kalapani is no crime. Swamiji was born at a time when some great social reform had started taking place in Bengal. Those were the years of the Bengal Renaissance. You had in the 1830s Raja Ram Mohan Roy, who campaigned against Sati. Then you had Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, who introduced, or rather forced the British to introduce the amendment for widow remarriage, which was banned earlier. So in the field of women's emancipation, Swamiji also wanted women to come forward and work as missionaries, take up other jobs. You've all heard of Sister Nivedita. Sister Nivedita, he inducted into the monastic order, which was not permitted at that time. Although in the past, our history tells us there were many women, saints and teachers, and women who excelled themselves in every discipline. But later, under various influences, idea of educating women and get them to become outgoing was banned. They all had to cover their heads and stay inside the zenana. Swamiji said that was absolutely incorrect, another mark of insecurity and insularity, and he wanted that taboo to also go, and worked ceaselessly for that. But most importantly, if we have to identify the one most significant thing about Swami Vivekananda, I would call him India's first globalizer. The first man in modern India who had a worldview, a vision for India and its place in the world. Suffering under colonialism and backward ideas for several centuries, Indian people had lost their pride. We were made to feel small. We were told by various colonizers, particularly the British, that Indian civilization has nothing to offer. There is nothing in it. Thomas Babington Macaulay is a controversial man. We are today speaking the language that he, in a sense, compelled the government of India then to adopt. English education, that we are all speaking in English, is his contribution, which in a sense is a positive thing, I agree. But also, he had supreme contempt for Indian knowledge and Indian wisdom. He said once that the entire knowledge and wisdom of the Orient, not just India, India, China, Japan, the entire knowledge and wisdom of the Orient can be compressed into one shelf of an average British library. This was the kind of contempt with which Indian ideas and thoughts were treated. This I'm talking about the 1830s, when Macaulay's famous minutes came and English education was introduced in India, and British jurisprudence was also introduced. Now, Swamiji, and in this scenario, just 30-odd years after this kind of Western superiority was being proclaimed from rooftops, and the school education, college education, everything was not only, in English, in the English medium, which I have said is a positive thing, but Indian knowledge and wisdom was sought to be eradicated. Just within 30 years, Swamiji brought it back to all of us, our ancestors at least, that look, there's nothing to be so defensive about. There's nothing to feel shrunken, nothing to feel small. You are inheritors of a great legacy. So, in your conduct, in your thinking, you have to become ambassadors of India's past, India's knowledge, India's wisdom, and interact with the modern world. That's why no Kalapani. Interact with the modern world, assimilate ideas from them, and apply them into the new context. So Swamiji had this dual role. One, he said that take Indian knowledge and wisdom out of India, cross the seas, cross mountains, go out, reach out to the rest of the world, and tell them that don't treat India with the kind of disdain that you have. And to Indians, he said, imbibe ideas from the West, imbibe technology, because they are ahead of us. But constantly, his one refrain was, do not lose your identity. Do not lose the soul of Indianness. Do not lose the spirituality. I think that balance was a very radical thing for the time. Because those days you had people who were either, insular to the extent of saying that we have nothing to learn from the West, our knowledge and wisdom is enough, and we should shut off our minds and confine ourselves to our ancient texts. And they were also believers in old-fashioned, or what they interpreted as age-old taboos, in consolidating the caste system, not allowing various sections to read, write, and go ahead in the world. So there was one group like that. And the other group was totally westernized. They believed that, like Macaulay, or they became believers in Macaulay, that there is nothing that India can teach Indians, leave alone the rest of the world. So you all have to become westernized, study Western philosophy, Rousseau, Locke, and John Stuart Mill, and others, philosophers of the West, and condition yourselves according to what West has to give us in terms of thought, in terms of ideas, in terms of technology, everything. So between these two extremes came Swamiji, who said, don't lose track of your past, of the residue of spirituality and knowledge and wisdom that you have inherited from your ancestors. But that does not mean you shut out the winds of change that are blowing across the world from Western knowledge, Western ideas, Western technology. Assimilate them. And when I said that Swamiji was India's first globalizer, he understood the importance of India going out, reaching out to the world, and explaining its philosophy, its knowledge and wisdom there. And again, learning from them. That is what took Swamiji to the World Parliament of Religions in Chicago in 1893. I'm sure you have all heard of Swamiji's famous address in Chicago to the World Parliament of Religions, which he began by saying, brothers and sisters of America, which at that point of time was so informal that the audience was completely taken aback. But Swamiji got a rapturous applause because his speech was so self-contained, so simple, lucid, the message of India, India's contribution to the world, and what India can contribute further to the world, sitting in the heart of America, which had become a rising power by then, to have delivered that. The West discovered, for the first time, much of the truth about Indian philosophy and Indian knowledge, which they had neglected and ignored for all these centuries. So, Swamiji understood that the world was shrinking. World was going to shrink further. And therefore, we all had to interact. We all had to interact with other countries, other civilizations, other people, other sources of knowledge, and in that process, kind of assimilate more and more things for ourselves. Thomas Friedman, in his book, The World is Flat, talks about the three phases of globalization. In the first phase, he says, came colonization. When Asia and Africa were colonized, there was a one-way flow of globalization. That one-way flow was from the West, particularly Britain, to all these countries. Britain, France, some other colonizing countries, but it was one way. One way because commerce was conducted for the benefit of the colonizing countries. I don't need to tell you, you're all aware that raw material was taken from India, manufactured in the factories in England, and sent back as finished goods to India, being a huge profit to the mill manufacturers and the British economy. And you had Western ideas, Western education, Western science and philosophy being taught. So that also was an import from the West to the colonized countries, particularly the jewel in the crown, namely India. That was phase one of globalization, a one-way street. Phase two came with the end of the Second World War, where many of these colonized countries got independence. They got independence. Independence, a political independence. Independence did not go beyond that political independence. Power was transferred from the hands of the colonial rulers, from the viceroys and governor generals to elected parliaments in some cases, dictators in others. But there was nothing beyond that. The models of development that all these countries adopted were basically Western in nature. The concept was Western. And this goes across political streams. Karl Marx, who is idolized by many people, or at least was idolized by many people in India and other countries, and Indian Marxists still do that. Karl Marx too had supreme contempt and disdain for India. What he called the Asiatic mode of production, which he said was exploitative. He talked about the steamroller or bulldozer of blind faith embodied in the Rath of Lord Jagannath, the Juggernaut as he called it. And he said that this had to be broken for the sake of the Enlightenment, and he said the British, oh thank you so much, British had a mission to do that. The same argument in a sense as the white man's burden, which Rudyard Kipling and others wrote about. So when you have this disdain cutting across political philosophies, philosophers and countries, it is in that context you need to realize that the message of globalization that Swamiji gave. So in the second phase of globalization, as I was telling you, maybe the direct exploitation stopped, but Western models were innovated and they got adopted by the colonized nations, which resulted in Western ideas and economic structures being replicated in the colonized countries, including India. But now, according to Friedman, is a third phase of globalization, phase 3, which he says in the interaction between civilizations, interaction between economies, interaction between peoples, and this phase 3 is not a government-to-government interaction, it is a people-to-people interaction. And if you think about it, although Friedman wrote nearly 10 years ago, now today, satellite television and instruments in your hand, the mobile handset, your Facebook, Twitter, and other social media have made it possible for the interchange of ideas people to people. You don't have to go through the official media. You don't have to go and appear on television. You don't have to write an article in a newspaper. You can communicate directly with people not only in your own country or your own friends and associates, but across continents. And this is where we are heading for a third phase of globalization, which is people-driven, not government-driven. And you know, when you look back at Vivekananda's ideas, may not have been fully articulated in these words, but there is a globalizing streak right through his argument of, yes, it is India-centric. He talks about Indian thoughts and ideas being communicated to the West, assimilating some of the best, but the idea behind it is that bypass government, bypass established authority, communicate between people, communicate between souls, put in a different language, in a different time. But I believe that there was a visionary idea that people can communicate with people without the intervention of others. A revolutionary concept at that time. But look at what has happened since. How this globalization, particularly globalization phase 3, has changed the face of the world. How people from India, talented people from India, have gone abroad and made a mark for themselves. Many of them are IITians. You should be happy and proud that you are in an institution which is regarded as among the finest in the world and which has contributed so much to the development of ideas, scientific techniques, and brought more wealth to America than to India so far. But nevertheless, you are recognized as a talent pool in the world. Indians are regarded as part of a knowledge society. And this is something I believe is a result of the self-esteem that many of us have acquired over the years, thanks to teachings of people like Swami Vivekananda, who told us that don't be small, don't feel small. You're not. You are very talented. And the youth of India is capable of achieving great success. But his constant advice was, remain rooted. Now, when Indians go abroad for further studies, work in organizations there, whether they become top financial consultants, great market managers, technicians, computer scientists, they go to NASA, they go to other organizations. They have done India proud and themselves proud. And Swamiji always used to say this, that if you have pride in yourself, and you must have pride in yourself, you will be able to excel in whatever you do. And some years ago, there was a joke that did the rounds. When venture capital investment in various Indian IT companies was kind of the hot thing. And it was said that in Wall Street, venture capitalists were falling over one another to fund and support Indian startup ventures. But the venture capitalists wanted to know whether there was a tambram on the board. Now, don't take tambram literally. I'm sure some of you here are, but don't get a sense of superiority. But tambram was just a symbolic point being made, because Americans love to do everything in shorthand, that it was a repository of intellect among Indians. So, when you have jokes of this nature, and when you Western venture capitalists who know very little about India start talking in this kind of language, you know what has been the influence of India on the West today. When I was studying at Oxford, of my two professors, one, an Englishman, Professor Ronald Robinson, was busy on a project which, and he was a very, somewhat right-wing, conservative professor, and he was studying the impact of what he called reverse colonialism. And the idea of reverse colonialism originated from the fact that people from the Indian subcontinent were effectively colonizing Britain. And that was because not just numbers, but because they were so talented, and they were taking up top jobs, and they were doing very well in school. They could not come to a conclusion. Professor Robinson died before the project could be completed. But I'm mentioning this to you, I'm talking about the early 80s. I was in Oxford from 80 to 84. And it was that time this project was going on. And the Indian IT boom, the explosion, had not even happened. And they were still getting worried, even those days, about the long-term impact of Indian talent and migration to the West. In a sense, Swamiji's dream has been fulfilled. It's fulfilled. We are going out. We are managing to convince the rest of the world. We are showcasing our talent in every sphere. And that is exactly why, if there is worry in the West, that is one of the reasons. And American professors, British professors, German professors, all wonder, how is it that generation after generation of Indian students perform so well? I have often faced this question when I visit universities abroad. And my standard answer, which I will repeat here today, in a nutshell, I have said it's the value system. It is the Indian value system which emphasizes so much on education. All of you know to what lengths parents go to give their children a good education. That was true of my previous generation, of my generation, and is true of your generation as well. And I'm convinced that this will go on. We are not going to ever abandon our children like in Western societies. When you turn 16, fend for yourself. If you want to study further, you work, accumulate money, go and pay your university fees. In India, that does not happen. And I'm sure that that will not happen now or 100 years later. The family value system is a critical element in Indian civilization. And that, I think, is another aspect of the Indian civilization that Swamiji emphasized so much, the value system. And if you can assimilate Western knowledge, Western technology, Western science, Western philosophy, while remaining rooted in the Indian value system, I think nothing in the world can stop us. One of the major points of Vivekananda's emphasis was the youth. And he really was a very young man, very young at heart, and very young in mind and body. Just imagine the Swamiji, who left such a remarkable impact on every aspect of our philosophy and practice, died at the age of 39. He died at the age of 39. Before that, just a year before that, he had gone to Chicago. By then, Ramakrishna Mission had been set up. So much achievement in such a short span of time. And one of the things that he used to say frequently, and let me quote, it is actually a quote from the Vedas. He says, "It is the young, the strong and healthy, of sharp intellect that will reach the Lord," says the Vedas. This is the time to decide your future. While you possess the energy of youth, not when you are worn out and jaded, but in the freshness and vigor of youth. Swamiji was not just, as I'm telling you, a bookish philosopher. He laid great emphasis on physical and spiritual health. Very few people have. Our sages have never emphasized the physical part of it. Swamiji told young men to go to gymnasiums, akhadas, and train in weightlifting, in bodybuilding, and have a very, very healthy body. Just imagine this. He's talking in the 1860s and 1870s. Gyms were unheard of anywhere in the world. He himself was a stickler for fitness. Just imagine, before he left for America, he wanted to meditate at the southernmost point of India, where 3 oceans meet. It was a spiritual journey. No trains those days. He journeyed by various means of transport, bullock cart, and trains. There were small connections here and there. rest on foot, reached Kanyakumari. Reached Kanyakumari, and there he saw the rock. Further down, about 2 kilometers into the sea, very, very choppy waters. I don't know how many of you have been to Kanyakumari. I have been there several times. At any point of the day or night, the waters at Kanyakumari, the oceans, are really, really furious and choppy. Bay of Bengal, Arabian Sea, and the Indian Ocean meet, and the cross currents cause a lot of waves, and the water is really daunting. And there are warnings everywhere not to venture out into the sea. Swamiji ventured out at the crack of dawn, swam all the way to that rock, climbed atop that rock, and sat meditating for an entire day. He meditated on the soul of India, on the spirit of India, and he later said that he wanted to internalize the whole thing at that symbolic point of the confluence of 3 seas. He swam himself. Any of you who have been, please don't try it. But once I went to Vivekananda Rock, and it was on a boat, on a ferry. The water is choppy enough to make a healthy person seasick, even in that short journey. And there are rocks strewn all over. People in Kanyakumari and the entire region marveled at this saint who came in his saffron clothes, shed them, swam across, came back, donned his saffron robes, and started walking back to Calcutta, from where he took a ship to proceed to Chicago. So I'm saying the physical well-being, physical health was as important to him as your mental health, your spiritual health. He wanted everybody to imbibe that. He said no nation can be great if the youth are lethargic, if they are lazy, if they are bookish. You have to get out of just libraries. You have to implement your ideas in practice, and you have to stay healthy. And for that, building your body is very, very important. And because he has so much faith in the youth, his message was, and I quote again, "Have tremendous faith in yourselves, like the faith I had when I was a child, and which I am working out now. Have that faith, each one of you in yourself. That eternal power is lodged in every soul, and you will revive the whole of India." So see the vision. Spiritually, in thought, this combination of youth and energy, even more than knowledge or books or shastras. Swamiji was no great believer in rituals. He never told them to observe this or observe that. He never said, read the Vedas or Puranas. He said, you must at some point, but that is not crucial. You have to understand the spirituality that resides within you and express it outside. On education, and I think this is very, very connected with what I'm trying to say. Education is not information that is put into your brain and runs riot there. Think about it. Education is not information that is put into your brain and runs riot there. It is the manifestation of perfection already in you. That education by which character is formed, strength of mind is increased, and the intellect is expanded, and by which one can stand on one's own feet. We must have life-building, man-making, character-making assimilation of ideas. That is true education. So the expansiveness of his definitions go well beyond what other philosophers have often told us, which is what makes Swamiji relevant even 150 years after he was born and 110 years after he died. How many ideas survive such a passage of time? Many philosophers have been born. It is the greatness only the great become great when their ideas become timeless, when they're applicable not only in their day and age, but in a new avatar, in new interpretations, are applicable 100, 200 years after their death. Swamiji was one of such rare persons. And what I'm emphasizing again and again is that his ideas about youth, the role of youth, and what he wanted to convey to the youth and about education are so relevant even today. You wouldn't think that all this is being said written about by somebody more than 100 years ago. I think this is something that all of you need to understand, because it's not just any old sage, and you have so many of sadhus and sants in India. Many believe in them, many disbelieve them, but Swamiji was a cut above the rest. Then comes the warning, which I think is very important. Why was he warning against the blind imitation of the West? He continues, this running theme. No blind imitation, please. Have self-respect. Have faith in yourself. You are repositories of a great civilization, of a great philosophies. But mark you, if you give up the spirituality, leaving it aside to go after the materializing civilization of the West, the result will be that in 3 generations you will be an extinct race. Because the backbone of the nation will be broken. The foundation upon which the national edifice has been built will be undermined, and the result will be annihilation all around. This Swamiji is saying in the 1880s. There was no satellite TV. There was no social media. There was no Hollywood. But Swamiji's, there were no shopping malls. Swamiji is warning against blind imitation. He doesn't say don't assimilate, don't take ideas. But if you don't assimilate and while remaining rooted, yes, your individuality, your identity will get wiped out. And this has happened in so many civilizations. You see, many African civilizations, which for instance, after their independence from Britain or France, have either degenerated into warring tribal groups, killing one another in the hundreds and thousands, or have become blind apes of the West. This has not happened to India or China or Japan, which is why we stand out. So, that's why I say that while he warned, but somewhere internally, even those who have not read Vivekananda know the warning. We have adopted, we have adapted, we have gone abroad, which Vivekananda said everybody must. Students must go abroad, they must assimilate, they must study, they must bring back new techniques and ideas. But don't become totally westernized by losing your moorings. But somewhere, internally, deep down, we know that, which is why the civilization has survived and will continue to survive. But I think this is important to be reminded of this message from time to time, because it is easy to lose track. And sometimes we feel that in India, this rat race, the commercialism that is coming, the commercialism that the media is promoting, that entertainment is promoting, nothing wrong with it. It is a global trend. But sometimes there are worries that this may get completely out of hand and we may forget our roots and our moorings, which is why we need to remind ourselves of Swamiji's warnings that the backbone of the nation will be broken, the foundation upon which the national edifice has been built will be undermined, and the result will be annihilation all around. The pride in India's civilization is reflected in another of his essays, where he says, India alone has that light, light with a capital L, not in magic mummeries, where mummies are, people are mummified, and charlatanism, but in the teaching of the glories of the spirit of real religion, of the highest spiritual truth. This is where he linked this concept with Daridra Narayan, which I was talking about earlier. That is why the Lord has preserved the race through all its vicissitudes unto the present day. Now the time has come. Have faith that you all are, my brave lads, born to do great things. Let not the bark of puppies frighten you. No, not even the thunderbolts of heaven. But stand up and work. So Swamiji's nationalism, and he was a great nationalist, was not a kind of purely political nationalism. He never talked much about British rule, colonialism, and so on and so forth. He believed that the country would never be free unless Indians, first and foremost, would develop that aptitude, develop that inner strength, develop that spirit of nationhood to bring about, to win freedom. It would happen, but it happened in due course. But yes, by then, the message had gone far and wide. You had a consciousness being awakened, and finally when Mahatma Gandhi came back to India, he ignited the fire that was beginning to simmer all this time, and was aided by sages like Swamiji, who gave such practical ideas about how to go about expanding the reach of knowledge and applying all this in real life. I have only one message to give you. Many of you, I know, will be going abroad for further studies, for jobs. You'll do well, you'll earn well, no doubt about it, and many of you may even settle down. Whatever you do, the only thing you should remember from Swamiji's teachings, assimilate, but don't get assimilated. That is very important. Because why should you? You are harbingers of a great civilization. Not just the fund of knowledge, technology, our history. You know, our colonial rulers showed us down so much that we have just forgotten, not only forgotten, but completely ignored our own history. When you travel to Southeast Asia, when you visit Angkor Wat or Borobudur or Yogyakarta or Java and see the gigantic and magnificent temples that were erected by our forefathers in those countries, when you read place names, when you read that there is a place called Ayodhya, which was the ancient capital of Thailand, then known as Shamdesh. Ayodhya is Ayodhya, and there they replicated what they believed was the palace of Lord Ram. And the king of Thailand to date is called Ram. How many of you knew this? I'm very glad. Very few people do. The reigning king, Adulya Dej Bhumibol, is Rama the Ninth in this dynasty. He's a scholar in Sanskrit. When Mr. P.V. Narasimha Rao was Prime Minister of India and he paid a visit to Bangkok, he went to pay a courtesy called on the monarch, Rama the Ninth, who was then in his 70s, now he's reaching his 90s, I'm told. The courtesy call was scheduled for 30 minutes. 2 hours passed and the two would not emerge from the inner chamber of the palace. Finally, when Mr. Narasimha Rao was knocked and reminded of his other schedules, bureaucrats knocked at the door and said, "Sorry, but you must leave now." Very reluctantly, the Prime Minister, Mr. Narasimha Rao, left. And he came and told people that, the king, Aduladej, is such a great scholar of Sanskrit that I got mesmerized. He was quoting texts and shlokas and Puranas to me even more than I knew. And Mr. Narasimha Rao was a great scholar. His legacy, his knowledge has all been ignored due to various reasons, mainly political, by his own party. But unfortunately, that part has also been blacked out. Narasimha Rao spoke 16 languages fluently. He was a great scholar. And he comes out and says the king of Thailand knew better Sanskrit than he did. These traditions are very important because they are the foundation stones of civilization. And that is retained. It is retained in the memory of people there. How many of us know it? When I visited Bali, I found to my utter surprise that 97% of Bali is Hindu. And mind you, they are a non-idolatrous form of Hinduism. Every village has a temple in which there are 3 pillars. In those temples, they are supposed to represent Brahma, Vishnu and Mahesh. We know nothing about it. We don't even know that every year in November, on the occasion of Kartik Purnima, observed in Odisha, from the coast of Puri, Jagannath Puri, symbolically, boats set off and come back, of course, now. This is to mark a 3,000-year-old tradition when traders from the east coast, particularly Odisha, used to sail all the way to Bali in boats laden with goods for trade. It is observed in Bali. It is observed only in Odisha. We don't even know about. The rest of the country doesn't know. You are in the vicinity of Allahabad, Mahakumbh is going on, and February 10th is Mauni Amavasya. I was astounded to learn when I went to Bali that Mauni Amavasya is a national holiday in Bali. And so, because nobody is supposed to make a sound, the airport is shut down. An economy which depends on tourism, they shut down the airport. Because they say it's Mauni Amavasya and you're not supposed to have any sound on that day. So you see, traditions are maintained. People have collective memory. And this memory doesn't come out of colonialism. We don't celebrate the births or anniversaries and things of British monarchs. If people in Bali remember it, if King Ram, the 9th of Thailand, studies Sanskrit shlokas, if in Malaysia the Prime Minister is called Pradhan Mantri, all this as a cultural impact and influence of the Indian civilization, which went all over the world, from Gandhar to Bali. We spread our ideas and cultures, and they have been sustained in those areas. So we are all inheritors of our great legacies. And the time has come to restore that primacy. And I will just conclude with just one quote. The only condition of national life, of awakened and vigorous national life, is the conquest of the world by Indian thought. Not conquest of the world by India, but by Indian thought. Now for that, I want young men, said Swamiji, after returning from Chicago. He was very inspired by the response he got. He had greatness of India, part of his dream, and he knew that dream could be fulfilled only by all those conditions that I have tried to outline. Physical, spiritual, intellectual health, being rooted while assimilating the best from other countries, other civilizations. So I believe the task is cut out for you. The road is cut out. Whether you go abroad or you don't, I think it's important to digest these teachings. Don't reject them as old-fashioned, medieval, obscurantist. Nothing obscurantist about it. Anything have I said about Swamiji's ideas you think are obscurantist? He was no great believer, as I told you, in rituals. Spiritual, yes. That's the spirituality that has kept India alive. Why do millions of people still assemble at the Kumbh? That is the spirituality, which let us not lose track of in our, this rat race of metropolitan life, nor blindly imitate the pop culture being propagated by television serials. There is nothing, and I repeat, nothing that is sacrosanct about Karwa Chauth and rituals of that nature, which have suddenly acquired great importance thanks to TV serials and Bollywood cinema. That is not the real India. Rituals can never get a country or civilization. They don't make a country great. But the spiritual commitment, spiritual belief, they do, and which is why Swamiji is so important to the nation and nation building. With these words, I will conclude today. If there are any questions, I'll be.
Sir?
Yes.
Here.
Yeah.
So you said that Indians are performing great everywhere around the world, which is true. But what is your case on what is your take on the Indians inside our country? If yes, why, and if no, why?
Well, I don't think Indians within the country are also performing that badly. There are so many sterling examples of people who have done very well, whether in the corporate world, whether in in science, technology. In so many fields, we have done very well, and we have really, I think, excelled in some of these areas. But every success requires a kind of material condition, and that material condition we have not been able to provide. What the West is able to do for, techies, so to speak, for scientists, research scholars. Why so many scientists run abroad? Because A, they don't get enough salaries, they don't get enough laboratories, they don't get equipment. So there's frustration. And in that frustration, they go abroad, and because they are so talented, they excel. I am, however, very confident that much of this is getting reversed. Many people abroad, who have settled abroad, are thinking of coming back to India. And they're coming back, even if they can't really change the system overnight. But they're doing things. They're doing things in their own villages. They're setting up hospitals, they're setting up schools, educational institutions of other kinds, to try and, express their commitment and faith to the country and do some good for the people. It will take some time. The system has got rotten in many parts. Politics is very often at the root of it, though not entirely the cause. Not entirely the cause of this situation. But I'm very confident that if people imbibe this, many of these thoughts and ideas, and eventually the more educated people become, and the more demanding they become, the more aspirational they become, the ruling classes will have to listen to the ideas and transform accordingly. We will be, in some decades' time from now, hopefully, be able to create the same conditions as exist in many advanced countries of the world.
Indians have a sense of complacency in us, that we just have a few star performers and then we overlook the rest of the nation. Let's say, in the case of, let's say, Narayan Murthy, we call him the father of IT in a country. But what about the other people who are, venturing into the same field? He has not done, that big a work in that particular field for a country.
I haven't thought very deeply about what you're asking. But yes, there is a tendency. Because we have so few rather greats, so few real achievers, that we tend to go overboard with anybody who achieves and gets recognition. It is very rampant in the field of sports. You tell me that some of our icons, how great are they compared to the rest of the world? Is there consistency in their performance? No. They may have won a medal here or there. But, what was the real achievement? I don't want to run down anyone, so don't get me wrong. What was the real achievement of Milkha Singh or P.T. Usha? You tell me. In any other country, nobody would remember them. They will be in a footnote. But here, and also this comes out of the way we were made to treat ourselves with disdain, that we are non-achievers, we can't do anything. So even if somebody comes fourth in an Olympic heat, we say it's a great performance. Things are better. Narayan Murthy, no doubt, is an icon. He created an institution out of nowhere. He himself has contributed greatly. But there's a team there. There are others who have come up after him. Many of them are getting recognized. But also, very often, you see, in every country, but particularly in India, money has become the measure of success. But sometimes it cannot be. Sometimes. Certainly, money is a measure of success. Dhirubhai Ambani and his sons will be remembered for how much money they made in one generation. But that cannot be the only measure of success or greatness. I think society is in turmoil. Our values are undergoing a lot of transformation. So some of these aberrations will happen. But every society goes through some of this. In, say, Industrial Revolution Britain, also people you read about in school textbooks, they're probably nothing very great. But yes, British have a tremendous sense of history and a tremendous sense of national pride. So examples were made of some achievers, but non-achievers or those who did not have opportunity to achieve really emulated them. In India, I'm afraid not too many people have that burning desire to make it to the top or make a mark for themselves. I think that is something we have to inculcate. There's something maybe deficient in our system, including our education system and the cramming that goes on, and therefore people just look forward to how to get over the period of education and then go join a multinational or a big company and make money. And that becomes the end of their education process. So unless some of these things change, these values sets and ideas, I think it'll be difficult. But with more and more success stories, there will be a certain equalization. See? So it won't be that others get ignored. Sometimes you need one or two icons to start a trend. I hope Narayan Murthy will be eventually regarded as somebody who started a trend. There will be 100 Narayan Murthys in the next few decades.
Hello.
Yeah.
Sir, I have a question.
Sorry, I can't.
Sir, over here.
Who is this? You can
Sir, hello.
Who's going?
Here.
You. Okay, yes.
So, how does belonging to a political party affects the expression of truth in the newspaper you belong to? Like, at times you have to criticize the same political party. So, how does it affect?
Well, this has nothing to do with Swami Vivekananda, but I will still attempt because it's a legitimate question, which I face all the time. You see, I'm a journalist first and a politician later. I drifted into politics for various circumstances, and I'm very happy there. I'm very happy in Parliament. I believe I have contributed something absolutely behind the scenes without any great fanfare. I've done something good in our committees, in framing laws and so on and so forth, in the debates. But I must tell you that yes, a political affiliation does put some curbs on the way you can run the paper. Although I keep saying that, look, my politics and my journalism are separate, honestly, they cannot entirely be so. I would say that while we do not black out or suppress news of other political parties, other groups, even those who are very critical of the BJP, to which I belong, there is a certain softness when dealing with the BJP. I will be candid enough to admit it. But in defense, I can only say that give me a paper, barring one or two, which are not headed or at least owned by politicians and MPs. I can name you at least 20 MPs who own newspaper groups and big newspapers. Their papers are running. One gentleman who is in the Rajya Sabha with me, whose name came in the Colgate scam, I'll name him, although the charges against him are not proved, but he is a friend of mine, I'm sure he will not mind it. Mr. Vijay Darda. Vijay Darda, Hitawada. Sorry? And so many, he's just the latest example. Jagran, such a big group. Its MD. Although I keep saying that, look, my politics and my journalism are separate. Honestly, they cannot entirely be so. I would say that while we do not black out or suppress news of other political parties, other groups, even those who are very critical of the BJP, to which I belong, there is a certain softness when dealing with the BJP.